You had a full day off. No obligations, nowhere to be, no one expecting anything from you. You stayed in, moved at your own pace, maybe watched something you'd been meaning to get to for weeks, ate when you felt like it. On paper, it was exactly the kind of day you'd been quietly looking forward to. The kind you romanticize on a Tuesday morning when your alarm goes off too early and you think, I just need one day, one full day to do absolutely nothing. And you got it. And yet, somewhere around 7 in the evening, sitting in the same spot you'd been sitting in all day, you noticed something quietly unsettling. You were just as tired as when you woke up, maybe more. That particular kind of tired is genuinely hard to articulate because it doesn't come with a clear cause you can point to. You didn't work late, you didn't have a hard conversation, you didn't run anywhere or carry anything heavy. And when someone asks what you did today and you say, honestly, not much, there's this small, uncomfortable beat that follows. A look, a silence, as if tiredness needs to be earned through visible effort to be considered legitimate. But here's what I want you to hold on to from the very start. The fact that you can't explain your exhaustion doesn't mean it isn't real. It just means the thing draining you isn't where most people think to look. And once you understand where it actually comes from, a lot of things about yourself start to make a different kind of sense. Here's the part nobody really tells you. Your brain does not have an off switch. The moment your external obligations disappear, your internal world gets louder, not quieter. That quiet afternoon on the couch, your mind was running its own private marathon the entire time. It was replaying a conversation from 3 days ago, searching for the exact moment things went slightly sideways. It was building imaginary arguments with people who weren't even in the room, rehearsing things you'd never actually say. It was writing invisible to-do lists for tomorrow, quietly cataloging everything that still isn't done, and second-guessing something you said last week that probably no one else even remembers. You were physically still, but mentally you were everywhere at once, and everywhere at once is exhausting. Psychologists call this the brain's default mode network. It's the mental activity that kicks in not when you're focused, but specifically when you're not. When you have nothing external demanding your attention, this system switches on automatically. For some people, it's relatively peaceful background noise, but for a lot of us, especially those carrying any kind of chronic stress, unresolved tension, or emotional weight, that default mode isn't a gentle hum. It's a full conversation. It's loud, it's restless, and it burns through energy the same way focused work does. The body rested, the mind quietly, furiously did not. And here's the part worth pausing on. Most of us have never been taught to account for that. We grew up with a very simple equation. Rest means stop moving. But the version of tired that visits you after a passive day isn't coming from your muscles. It was never in your muscles to begin with, which means no amount of lying down was ever going to reach it. And that gap between the rest you gave yourself and the rest you actually needed is exactly what we're going to close. Before we get into why this happens specifically, I want to point something out because I think you'll recognize it. There's a version of this exhaustion that doesn't just show up on your days off. It shows up on Sunday evenings before a regular Monday. It shows up after a vacation that should have reset everything. It shows up after a full 8 hours of sleep, when you open your eyes and the very first thing you feel is a faint, wordless reluctance to start again. That's not laziness, that's a signal. And the body is quite specific about what it's signaling, even when it doesn't have the words. Here's what I find genuinely fascinating about this. The reason you feel this way isn't one thing. It's actually a very specific combination of things that most people spend years trying to fix with the wrong tools entirely. And there's one piece of it in particular that almost nobody talks about, which I think is going to land differently than you expect. So if you're watching this and you already feel like it's describing something you've never quite been able to name, leave a comment, even just yes, because you're almost certainly not the only one, and it helps to know that. And if this is a channel you're new to, we do this kind of thing here regularly. Quiet, grounded explanations for the things most people just silently endure. Subscribe if that sounds like somewhere you want to be. Think of your energy not as a single battery that either charges or depletes, but as 5 completely separate tanks, each one requiring a different fuel source to refill. The first is your physical tank. This is the one everyone talks about. Sleep, food, rest, movement. This is the tank your body is loud about when it's empty, and it's the only one most people consciously try to refill. The second is your mental tank. This one drains whenever you think hard, make decisions, hold information in your head, or, and this is the one people forget, worry. Sustained worry is cognitive labor. It costs something real. The third is your emotional tank. This is the one that empties when you suppress what you're actually feeling, manage other people's emotional states, perform fine for long enough that fine stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like a prison. The fourth is your social tank, which, depending on how you're wired, either drains from too much togetherness or too much isolation. And the fifth is your sensory tank. This one takes a quiet, constant hit from noise, artificial light, back-to-back notifications, and the low-level hum of a world that never fully powers down. Now, here's where it gets important. A day off that only addresses the physical tank, lying down, not exerting yourself, leaves the other 4 completely untouched. And if your emotional and mental tanks were the ones running on fumes, you are going to get up from that couch feeling like you barely rested, even if you technically did everything right. Because the tiredness wasn't living in your body, it was living somewhere else, and you tried to water a plant through the wrong pot. This is why 10 hours of sleep sometimes produces nothing. This is why a week on the beach can leave you returning home somehow more depleted than when you left. You rested one thing while the other 4 kept going. Out of all 5 tanks, the emotional one is the most chronically underestimated. And I think it's because emotional labor is invisible by design. Most of us were never given a framework for thinking of feelings as something that requires energy to process. But managing an emotion, particularly one you're not expressing, is work. Holding back frustration in a meeting because the context isn't right costs something. Smiling through a situation that's quietly wearing you down costs something. Deciding in real time whether this is the moment to say what you actually think or whether you should just let it go again, that decision alone costs something. And you make versions of that decision dozens of times a day. The tricky part is that none of this announces itself as effort. It doesn't feel like lifting something heavy. It feels like just existing, like being a regular person navigating the ordinary texture of daily life, which is precisely why you can arrive at the end of a day where nothing happened and feel completely hollowed out, because something did happen. 100 small, invisible negotiations happened inside you that no one else saw, including sometimes yourself. You mediated your own internal world all day long, and you did it quietly and without acknowledgement, and the bill comes due at the end of the evening, when you sit down and feel like a phone that's been running too many background apps since 6 in the morning. A passive afternoon of television and snacks doesn't reach any of that. It's like trying to charge a phone by setting it near an outlet. Proximity to rest isn't the same as actual rest. Real rest, the kind that actually refills the tanks that are empty, tends to be more specific and more intentional than we expect. And often it feels counterintuitive because it sometimes requires doing something rather than doing nothing. Mental rest, for example, isn't always silence. It's stopping the loop. It's a walk where you're genuinely not trying to solve anything. A conversation that has no stakes attached to it. A task so simple and complete, washing dishes, folding laundry, tending to something small, that it barely registers as thinking, and somehow leaves you calmer than when you started. Your brain gets to be occupied without being pressured, and that's a fundamentally different experience than being idle while anxious. Idle while anxious is not rest. Engaged without pressure, that's closer to it. Emotional rest looks like honesty, not grand vulnerability, not a difficult conversation you've been putting off, just the small, everyday act of letting yourself feel what you actually feel without immediately reframing it. The moment you stop performing, even just for 20 minutes, even just in a journal, even just in the car alone with music that asks nothing of you. It's the quiet relief of being real without an audience, not fixing, not processing, just setting the thing down, even briefly. Emotional rest is what happens in that space, and most of us are so unaccustomed to it that it initially feels like doing nothing when it's actually doing something quite specific and quite necessary. Sensory rest is genuinely underrated in a way that I think borders on the criminal. We live inside a near constant stream of input: notifications, ambient noise, screens at every angle, conversations happening in 3 directions. Your nervous system is absorbing all of it, even when you don't notice. And sensory rest is simply stopping the stream, not meditating, not achieving anything, just sitting in a dim, quiet room without your phone for a few minutes, where nothing is asking anything of you and nothing is competing for your attention. For a nervous system that's been quietly overstimulated for a long stretch of time, that particular kind of stillness doesn't feel boring. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for longer than you realized. Here's the honest thing worth saying plainly. We live inside a culture that is extremely good at offering distraction and genuinely poor at offering recovery. Scrolling isn't always rest. It's a different form of consumption, just lower effort. Television isn't always rest. Sometimes it's quieter noise layered over unquieter thoughts. And when the only rest strategy you have is do less physically, you are going to keep waking up from your days off feeling strangely cheated, like you gave yourself exactly what you asked for and it still didn't work, because the thing you needed to recover from was never physical to begin with. You're not broken because rest doesn't restore you the way it's supposed to. You're not dramatic and you're not weak. You're most likely using a single tank solution for a 5-tank problem, and that's not a character flaw. That's just information. Really useful, genuinely actionable information that nobody handed you when you needed it. So the next time you feel that familiar guilt, the guilt of being tired after a day that looked easy from the outside, remember the tanks. Remember that your mind was working the entire time your body wasn't. Remember that the weight you carried was real, even though no one else could see it. And give yourself permission to rest in a way that actually reaches the part of you that's tired. Not the part everyone assumes is tired, the part that actually is. The video on your screen right now goes even deeper into exactly why your brain refuses to quiet down, even when you're desperate for it to. Watch it next.